There's something really strange going on here. Whereas at first I thought it was like mere coincidence. Now, the more and more, every time I flip open the iPhone to start recording, boom, there she is. I mean, just casually or mysteriously wandering through the frame, or start making loud slurping noises or pecking at her food in her own typical way, like she's testing it first for poison. And the timing, I mean, it's suspiciously perfect, because it's always at moments when normally she's quiet or completely uninterested. I mean, it's amazing after all these years that you have to discover that we've been living like with a spotlight chasing a drama queen. So if ever the next time she shows up, I'm not even going to bother, but don't be fooled, it's not random, it's like full-blown theater. We should be fine here. It looks like those sedatives do seem to work. Okay. Hello everyone. Today it's engine time, and we'll start with support removal. So let's dive straight in. So let's start with number one, the sump here. And in the booklet you can then check how difficult it is. So this is a pretty easy one. You take your visor, so then you can start inspecting the parts. And as I think I showed in earlier videos, what you first want to do is, other than looking where all the supports are, is to check the sensitive areas. And in the case of the sump, I'm not sure if you can clearly see it, there's this vent pipe here that you want to take particular care of, because on the one where I showed the click, which I did 50 times, it broke off. So this is something to take care of. So that's the first one that you want to release. So then you take a tweezer of your choice. I'm taking a relatively precise one, and then you start plucking to see if it comes off. And the final check is to see whether whether it has been released. So now it's fully free, you see, and then either with this one or with your hand, or I'm taking the bigger one, you'll see that the supports have been organized into like what you could call columns or pillars. And then what you can do is with the thicker one, peel them off until they break, and then our sensitive friend here is fully free. Okay, so we got off to a good start here. Let me just, before we go further, a couple of points, because here you see the pillar. I think I already explained it in the tools video, but a tweezer is a very appropriate tool, because using different type of gentle motions, such as this single one, you wiggle it a bit, and then this trident, you press them a bit together. These are all motions which lead to a break of the support where it's engineered to break, namely at the cross section where the support ends and the part starts. Whereas a knife, that's less secure, because I mean it could cut at some other point, leaving you some cleanup to do. Now the second thing is, which I forgot, this is a pillar or a column which only has supports at the top, but we'll show that later on when we see a couple. But it could very well be for reasons of stability, or just for 3D printing, or that there are also some supports halfway. So that's why it's good to see with a visor how like a particular column or pillar is constructed, so that you can see where you need to work to free a whole pillar, so that you can then peel it off. Okay, so let's continue. I'll put this here. Once you've completed that first step of freeing up the sensitive ones, if there are any of course, then it's time for the main course. And there the goal, as a general principle, is what I call achieve a critical mass or reach a tipping point. Obviously not for the simple ones here. I'm talking about the more robust ones, such as this one. I think there must be around 50 support points. that are all strategically placed to ensure that support removal and cleanup go as smooth as possible. In fact, next time I will ask Thanasis how many there are. Yeah, now I mentioned Thanasis because I always seem to mention Costas. Gas patch molds, of course, a full team, and Thanasis is a key player, in all honesty, a bit of a magician. So what do I mean by reaching the tipping point? Well, again, not for every part, but we're not going to remove each of these individual supports in a way that we did it for the sensitive areas, because then this video would take all day. So the idea is that the more supports you remove, obviously the more exposed and the more vulnerable the part becomes, until you reach a tipping point where it barely resists, and that's the moment when you can safely strike. And the game plan here is that you first undermine the base, and when it's completely free, then the part ends up hanging against a support structure, a bit like leaning against the wall, and then you can easily grab it and release it. And in this particular case, what you want to do is grab both sides of the supports and press inwards, because all the supports have been placed outward in, so from the middle to the inside of the casing, not even at the contact zone, and that's intentional, because when everything is removed, the contact zones are seamless, and you can snap both casings together without any cleaning required. When you're at that moment, you also want to hold the part, obviously taking care of the sensitive areas, and that's to prevent it from ending up on the other side of the kitchen. So let's now start by cutting off the ground here from under the part. So as usual, you take your visor and then you inspect how those supports are here on the front side, and then you can see that there are a couple on the front, and then they're lined up in 3 parts. So what you want to do here is work from front to back, so that you gradually cut the ground here underneath the part. So let's do that again, similar approach. So yeah, I have a different one here now. You see, until the pillar is removed. Up. Up. You see, and then gradually things start to open up. So here you see then you have these next 3, so pretty much the same thing. And you see that like a tweezer is a very nice and comfortable way, because the part almost breaks each time at the place where it's supposed to break, namely at the intersection where the support ends and the part starts. So you now for this first one, I'll try to do it fully, but you see, and that's how gradually the front gets released. Okay, I'll finish. Oop, that was okay. The piping is still there. I'll finish this up, and then we'll end up with how to chuck it off. Okay, so I finished up undermining the base. So now the ground are fully free. I think if you can see it, that now it floats. And it just leans against the support structure here. So this is where we've reached the tipping point. So let me just do that. And obviously, again, always try to take care of the sensitive areas. So I'm first gonna remove my visor. Okay, so this is the moment where we will be chucking it off, and I hope I can do it in the right way so that you can clearly see it, and if not, there's always the upper part of the crankcase, of which the game plan is actually the same. So let's just get started. So as I mentioned, you just grab the both supports and you press it gently inwards. You hold the part, you make sure that you don't touch the sensitive area, and then you just start checking it off, and you see this is the end result, and you end up with all the supports removed, and this is the structure. And if you can clearly see, you can have an idea how the supports have been strategically placed. Okay, so we have our first part done here, at least the support removal, because then there's a little cleanup to do. Notably here on the back side you'll notice some points, but that's because as it sits on the bottom, the support structure, they're the thinnest possible, but they have to be thick enough obviously to carry the weight of the entire part. So we'll also show how you can do that. Okay, on to the next part, E02. Or the upper crankcase half. You will notice always also the part numbers which are at the bottom of the supports. So always the same. You take your visor so that you can inspect and admire the engineering. You'll see if there are any sensitive areas. You peel typically outside in or front to back. And then the game plan here is pretty much the same. So we'll undermine the base until the point where the part sort of leans against the wall again, and we'll do the same principle of chucking it off. So let's start. No real sensitive areas here, just that you need to take care of these protruding vent pipe, but they already are released, so you just need to make sure that you don't break them off. So we peel outside from the top to the bottom, and we peel outside in. Let me just pick one, and it's always the same. You take the tweezer, you see, and you get like this pillar up. Same here, that's a trident. So you squeeze it a little until the top is released. As mentioned before, I probably mentioned, no, I forgot to mention that is, you see that here a pillar has only supports at the top, but it could be that they might be halfway. So as said, you always need to inspect the part. So we continue, and you see you peel off the pillar. Same here, you peel off, and then the other side, same thing. See, it goes really very easy. Voila. And you'll notice here too, the supports have been placed outside in, so inside the crankcase, not even at the contact zone, as mentioned before. And also later on, you'll see here those 4 points where the engine will mount onto the frame. They're also fully released with no supports to make sure that you have minimal cleanup. So that's the first step. Okay, the second step here is then to remove the base. So after you've inspected with your visor again, now this is a little different, and this is where a knife might be a little bit more appropriate, because the supports are such that they're lined up and there's not enough space to reach in between with the tweezer. So there you would use a knife very gently. Obviously the disadvantage of a knife is that you risk cutting either into the parts, or you risk cutting not at the place where it needs to break. But if you do that gently, you could even push it a bit. So let me just try to do that, but I'll do it here on the ground to make sure that we're gentle. And you don't need to necessarily cut, but you could also use the knife to kind of push it. So you dab it rather than making this movement, you see? And then once again, you've seen that the top, all the supports are removed from the top. You could then again maybe use a tweezer or something to gently move it, free it up. I mean, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. And then you check, okay, we're having here some further support, so we're gonna strip away this first line of defense. Maybe I use a knife here to cut the supports here a bit on the bottom, but that's just to make sure that I have enough room to tackle this next. But it's all pretty straightforward. And then again, you'll see that you reach a point of the critical mass when the whole part kind of leans against the support structure. And I'll do it in one go. You make sure again that the sensitive areas are okay, and then you press outside in, because it's exactly the same, and then you start checking by holding the part until it releases. And here again you will see that all the supports are placed inside. Some of them have been left here, so they're placed inside the casing so that the contact zone is fully free, so that later on we can quickly and without any effort seamlessly snap both casing halves together. Okay, so that's number 2. Okay, so on to E03, or the cylinder block with the overhead valve gear. It's a bit more, I've put it right in the middle, it's a bit more tricky, just because there are a bit more sensitive areas, like the wiring on the spark plugs, and then the cylinder rails, which are also quite fragile. But for the rest, it's pretty much the same. This is also an example of a unique part, which are indicated here. So you have common parts, unique parts, alternative parts. And that's because, for example, for Loge, it is just standard. But then if you see for Büchner, it has these additional gun sights mounted on the engine. Okay, so let's get started. So we take the visor so that we can inspect everything up close and look at the beautiful details. And the first thing we're going to do is this obvious one here, but that's why you need to inspect up close, because there's an attachment point here which sits right underneath the attachment point of the exhaust. But then that same column also has like a tiny attachment to the wiring of the spark plug. So you just as we did before with the E02, it's not like you can immediately peel it off. Always check if like all the supports of a particular column are freed up before you start doing it. So let me just do that. So this one is loose, and then I'm gonna take off the upper part here with a nipper, so it becomes more easy to see. Here I want to be extra careful, and if not, I can always scalp it a bit. Yep, so now it's loose, and I can check off and then remove it. You see, and then everything gradually opens up, so you can work up your way to the next one. So here I'm taking the tweezer again. That's okay. But here too, you see that there is this, so there are two support points on the flash rails, one again on the attachment point of the exhaust, but then on the bottom here there's again one, and let me just take the top one off so that you can more clearly see it. There's one that sits down here again on the wiring of the spark plug. So now that one is released too, so I can take my thicker, and you see those wiring, they're okay. So that's how you progress by removing all the others. So let me just do that again. Here there's only they're only linked to the flash rail. So here you see a double one again on the attachment point of the exhaust, and then one underneath at the wiring. Okay, this is loose again. I always do housekeeping to make sure everything is nice and clean and free. So here we're almost halfway. Release the top one. Now on purpose here I'm using the nipper to remove that top part so that you can clearly see the bottom attachment points. So here too you see one on the exhaust and one on the here on the wiring. So I'm going to remove the exhaust first. Hopefully you can see it clearly. Yep, this one is free again too. A couple more to do. Release the top ones and just nip it off so that you can better see it. Then here the one on the exhaust and then the one on the bottom. Just making sure we're not making mistakes here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, we should be fine. Okay. Release the top one. I think this one is again one which stands on its own. A couple more to release it. Oops. Okay. And here you can clearly see those attachment points to the wires. Oops, so we pinch that off and we're done. think there's one more. Yeah, that's just housekeeping. Okay, and we got our one side fully done. And so now I'm going to do the other side, but we're not going to show that because it's pretty much the same thing. So here I removed both sides. Actually, the port side is even more straightforward than the starboard side, because where the supports of the starboard side are interlinked, so there's one on the flash rail, the exhaust, and then the spark plug wiring. On the other side, they are separated, so you can remove the flash rails first and then take off the inner ones. And now I understand why that comes, because on the over-compressed engine we have these additional water cooling, and that's here integrated. So here too you have to take care that it's that you take it off at the right place, so that you leave this open, because when you put the inlet manifolds, the other part of the water cooling will sit on top. It was quite a bit complicated to make sure that we had a good way to ensure that. So the regular D3A, so the 180 will be much simpler because we don't have that here. Okay, that being said, so here we are at the tipping point, and you can easily chuck that off manually, because as you'll see, all the supports are placed on the bottom. So when we then fit the cylinder into the crankcase, that will not be a problem. You just need to make sure that when you chuck it off, you make sure that you don't hit the flash rails and the spark plug wiring. So maybe the best thing to do is not do it manually, but just take a nipper or something, because here there's relatively little risk of tension. Yeah, just make sure I don't. All right, see? That's maybe the better way than trying to chuck it off. Not that it's not possible, but then you risk hitting those sensitive areas. And then we are left here with our E03. Now that we have those three main ones done, maybe it's a good time to do some dry fitting, because it's always nice to see how things take shape. And I must say I had this feeling again of gradual discovery as the tiny little details start to appear when you kind of gradually remove the curtain. There's no way to do it wrong, because one of the joints is hexagonal. So you cannot simply put it the wrong way. And here you see already a nice, beautiful Mercedes engine taking shape. Now, the part doesn't hold. Now you're gonna say, okay, but in the engine rewind video where we started with this plastic injection molded one, I mean, this held it. But then it was a conscious decision, because previously we had it designed so that it would fit instead of flash, but then we decided against it because the tolerances were a bit too tight, and then you risk pressing too much, and then you risk hitting the flash rails. And rather than tidying up the tolerances just a tiny bit to still keep a Gothaforce principle, with the advent of our resin UV, you can just as simply flash it rather than fitting it. And then there are two ways of doing that, which we'll explain later. Either you flash it from the sides, or as I explained in the instructions, you could also flash it by keeping the top one separate, and then you flash the insides. Obviously then you still have the job to make sure that the bottom one fits nicely onto that. And now that we see our prototype again, when I mentioned the Gotha joint as being form follows function, I must say that I was corrected by one of our pre-order customers, who's an architect and knows a lot more about design as me. And he actually said it is, Costas is calling me, it is form is function rather than form follows function. And he's right. And apparently form follows function was I mean, not invented, but kind of defined by a guy called Louis Sullivan. But then another guy called Frank Lloyd Wright later on, other than stealing all his ideas, he came up with the concept that form is function. And in fact, he's right, because the shape of the logo and the fact that with the 9 dot joints, it fits together. I mean, there's no real hierarchical relation between the two. So form is function fits the bill. Thanks, Mark, for correcting me. Okay, on to the next part. Thank you for watching.
Take it off, slow, steady, undress, impress. Take it off, slow, steady, undress, success. Take it off, slow, steady, undress.